Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about being calm. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, when an engineer is calm under pressure, how do you figure out if they are calm by nature trying to focus on the problem, or if they are calm as they are indifferent and don't really care about the problem? Ooh, this is a good one. So this is something that is very tricky for you to figure out unless you have serious people skills usually. So the way that I do this is usually that I take a look at the personal energy levels of the person, and then I cross-reference their energy levels when they communicate over a period of time, because it's difficult to say in just one session. I cross-reference that with their reasoning behind the code that they are writing. In other words, if I see a person who has a very a low amount of a lot of low energy, like usually, as you said, is sort of calm, very low key, and so forth, and they also write really shitty code, that tells me something. And then I have one last thing that I usually do, which is that I check creativity. I have a few tricks that I use in the teams that I run. It's not like I'm not deceiving anyone, like it's completely open. It's just that I observe what happens when I do it. It's sort of it's the simple way I do it is usually that I create a open day, or a forum where I say that we because that is what we encourage. We want this to happen. It's just that I don't force people to do it, but I do look at who is doing what. So what I do is that I allow one day, usually per week, for whatever I can manage to get from the product owners or so forth, where the team can pick like a story, like an arbitrary, like let's say that you found something in the code that you weren't so happy with and you would like to just focus on that and fix that or something like that, then go for it. Absolutely go for it. And I say, yeah, take this day, like we have like an improvement day or a bug catching day, call it whatever you want, where you can go and sort of opt out of the story that you have and get to work a little bit on that thing. I've also found that to be a very delightful things for some people who sit on really long stories to get a break, like a mental break from the story that they're working on for a day or something like that. It could be longer. It depends on your team, right? But that I also use, and the reason why I use that is because when you give a person the choice to do whatever they want, because what usually happens is that low-key energy people, or like the more introverted people, they are more let's go with the flow type usually, which means that they don't really take initiative themselves on average. But there's a difference between being low-key and having good ideas and being someone who doesn't really give a shit about anything. And all of these three things together gives you a picture, like it gives me a picture of the person that I'm dealing with. So as an example, a worst case scenario, the way that I sort of figure out if this is a person who's completely indifferent, is if you have a person who is usually very low energy, doesn't really engage in conversation or so forth and so forth, plus they don't really come with any initiatives or thoughts or ideas on improvements, even when probed. Like, you mean they don't show any type of creativity whatsoever. Third and lastly, they are always they're almost always lazy and resistant to do anything that isn't the bare minimum of what they are accustomed to doing. These three things together is how I spot a person who doesn't give a shit about their work, and they are usually not able to hide that. Like, it's not possible to hide it, because it's how do I put this? It's almost, in a sense, it's almost like if you imagine like these con artists or people who swindle people. One of the things that the basics, like the base thing for their technique, is that they leverage the fact that most people in a new interaction are trying to be more agreeable and more and welcoming and open-minded, because when you meet people for the first time, we humans have a tendency to try to be as accommodating as possible, and they can exploit that for a period of time. But over time that becomes very difficult, because as they lie, or like they sort of try to pretend to be someone they're not, they're going to start to be inconsistent, and people are going to start going to calm down and not be in that elevated state. And that means that they have to move on at some point, because it becomes impossible for them to maintain this facade, if that makes sense. It's sort of like when you're trying to be extra nice, you can be the most agreeable person in the world, but if you're not inherently that person, it becomes very difficult for you to maintain that over very long periods of time with the same people every single day. It's sort of like wearing a, pretending to be, there's a lot of people who are pretending, right? But it is energy draining. Same thing for the software developer. Even if you're very agreeable, or like very so forth and so forth in the interviewing stage, for example, it's very unlikely that you will be able to maintain that over a very long period of time. And if you have someone like myself who know what well, I'm not saying that I know all of that, but I usually am good at spotting the people who make the difference, who really do bring in that energy or the value, or like, even if they're not so talkative, because you don't have to be an extrovert to be useful or be valuable to a team. The people who have that drive, I usually find that they are usually people who are driving something. They're pushing something. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but something. And the people who really don't give a shit, as I said, they can only do something if handed responsibility. They are more, if that makes the drivers are usually pulling things when you put them in the right environment. They pull in things because they want to contribute, and the people who are very lazy and don't care, they always have to be pushed to absolutely everything. That is how I identify them usually. So, what I want you to take away from this is that a person who is usually calm under pressure and like just sort of solid, but actually cares about what they do, usually have opinions. You can, if you know software developers and you know how to code, you usually know how to create a situation. And I like to think that I'm sometimes pretty good at this, to facilitate without actually doing it consciously. It's sort of, how do I put this? You know how, if there is an episode in Game of Thrones, if I remember correctly, just before they murder Joffrey and half the world was just celebrating, right? Where, I can't remember her name now, but the princess he's going to marry says something along the lines that the table seating is a battle map, basically, because depending on how you position people, you might create alliances, and so forth and so forth. And I completely buy into that idea, where just proximity and positioning people in the right environment will give you a certain effect. It's the same thing you do with anyone, right? If you want to affect their state of mind, you can change their context, and that context is very important. So, as I said, my three tricks is usually to look at their overall energy level. Pretty much everybody does that, because if someone is like high energy, that gives you one impression. If someone's sort of low energy, that gives you another impression. But that's not the whole story. It's very difficult to say, as the person asking the question was mentioning. But the second thing is, this is where you sort of combine things, is if you give them the option of being creative, or if you try to you put them in a context where they're sort of free to do whatever they want, and you observe that they never ever take the chance to improve anything, they never take they don't speak up, they don't engage, they don't do anything that is not requested of them specifically. And when you go and look at when they're coding and so forth, they have no drive whatsoever. And sometimes you might even see resistance. Like if you give them feedback in a code review or something like that, they don't actually want to engage. And they usually don't want to, if you ask them to do something that is a little bit, an example would be, if you ask them to add unit tests, do they add unit tests, or do they fight you against, not adding unit tests, etc., etc.? And when they do their work, are they trying to actually do it well, or are they just usually trying to do the bare minimum that they need to do in order to get the thing done right? These three things are usually the way that I spot if someone cares about their job or not. Have a great day.